welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. Thanks for joining me. If you like crime and consistency, then this is a channel for you. I release my content on a Wednesday and a Sunday religiously. Also, even though it won't be when this comes out, it's actually Dustin Media who films this, aka my long-suffering husband's birthday today. So a big happy birthday to you, Pete. You are incredibly youthful. We shall not disclose your age because it will make people jealous with you being so youthful. And I'm only a little bit older, which must mean that I'm also quite youthful. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you very much to all my Patreon followers. I appreciate you massively. It's meaning that I can dedicate lots of time to making content, which I appreciate. Also to anybody who comes and watches me, your views, your likes, your messages, your subscriptions, they make a massive difference. Thank you so much. I cannot believe how lucky I am to have this channel, and I'm never going to go away. I'm just going to one day be sat here just minutes before death trying to get an extra one out. I imagine that will probably happen. The case that I'm going to be covering today is a pretty hideous one. Also, the female in this is the main perpetrator. I think that's important because I do a lot of videos that tend to be about men killing people. And with respect, that's because statistically, you guys, you kill more people. But nonetheless, just for the sake of balance, I thought I'd pick a pretty gruesome case that demonstrates potentially the worst possible characteristics in the female form, all in one human being, literally. By the end of this video, I'm pretty sure that we will all be able to agree that Clare Nicholls was indeed a sociopathic maniac. Was that too far? Was that too judgy before I even began? But I'm pretty sure by the end of it, you'll be like, nah, she can be a bit biased, but I think on this one, she might have hit the nail on the head. So, Clare Nicholls, we're going to be looking at, in this video, incredibly controlling, torturous behaviour. It's a scenario that I think we don't hear a lot about, where women are concerned looking at coercive control and domestic abuse and torture in general, but certainly she absolutely falls into these categories. She was a single mother of 3 children when she met Andrew Gardner, the man that she took the life of. At the time, she had 2 girls aged 9 and 5, and she also had a 7-year-old boy. She was, from a very early age, incredibly controlling. She was known to have this very violent and quick temper. Also worth noting that she had a really complex and complicated sex life. Sex to her was something that was about domination and power, and actually there was definitely an element of sadism towards it. So we're looking at a woman who already stands out for lots of reasons. We always know that when we talk about sadistic sex, we're not talking about sadomasochistic pleasure. We're not talking about adults consenting who enjoy particular levels. We're talking about a sadistic paraphilia, so a sexual level where the person can only really enjoy sex if she's either, or he's either, humiliating or harming the individual that they're with. We're talking about it being less than consensual at this point. So she had a really disrupted family life. When she was a teenager, her parents did split up, and to all accounts, she had a very tough upbringing. She was an individual who didn't have it easy, so we've got to allow her that. We've got to have some empathy with the fact that when she was growing up, it was challenging for her. She also moved out of the family home in Portsmouth at 15 years of age. That in itself demonstrates that she's got dysfunction in her world. No child at 15 should be moving out of a family home. I appreciate that they do. I appreciate that they leave much earlier than that because they go into the care system. Because unfortunately, it turns out that people who have kids don't always treat them well. It drives me insane. That old saying that you needed a license to keep a dog, you don't anymore, but you did used to apparently. That in itself is something that's very demonstrative of reality, isn't it? Because anyone can have children. And I know that most people have kids and are great with them, but sometimes you just hear of these cases and you're like, why did you even consider the prospect of having children? You must have known that the level of empathy and compassion you had within you was so low that the likelihood of you making a good parent was minimal. And on top of that, if you do have children and don't want them, there are opportunities to get them adopted, which would be a far better scenario than keeping them in circumstances that are pretty horrific. She obviously was an individual who hadn't had her needs met at this point. You know, leaving home demonstrates that. She met a man as well and ended up living with him for 2 years. So that concerns me because if you were parents who had a level of responsibility towards your children, at 15 years of age, you are legally responsible for them. You can literally get the police to go to the house and bring the child home. It's as simple as that. So if you haven't done that, it kind of means that it sounds like you've relinquished those responsibilities. And a child growing up who feels that their parents aren't concerned about those responsibilities is a child who's going to feel a level of abandonment. It doesn't even matter if that child is actively saying, I don't want to be around you, I don't like you, I want to live somewhere else. You know, kids do that. I did that quite a lot. But the distinguishing feature is, you say, well, I still love you, I still care for you, and these are the rules and regulations. And that child may be angry, but they'll also have a really clear message, which is, you have meaning to me. You let that person just walk out the door, then you're really compounding this sense of abandonment. And that can make people highly resentful. It can also mean that in relationships, they seek to control them. Because after all, if people are that flimsy in your life, that even when they're meant to be the most important people, they can just let you walk away, well then, how can you believe that you'll ever be safe in relationships? And even though for the most part, that would result in people being quite vulnerable and maybe being quite needy, think about it if you've got other personality traits. It may turn you into an individual who uses the manipulation, maybe some levels of narcissism, maybe a personality disorder. And again, I'm not talking about BPD, I'm talking about serious personality disorders that can have incredibly damaging impact on the people that you're around. Imagine having those traits and having that attachment issue and abandonment issue. You might seek, therefore, to control anyone who comes into your world to prevent them from leaving. And also, when you have relationships with people who seemingly stay with you, maybe you won't respect them because the level of belief that you have about yourself is you are somebody that can be abandoned. You are somebody who's disposable. So the consequence of that is, even when people stay, it causes resentment because it makes you question, why did they want me when my parents didn't necessarily want me? And if you can make them seem less than, and therefore it compounds and confirms the belief that you were disposable, you might build in levels of resentment and hostility. I'm not saying that was the case, I just think it's really important that we explore those potential issues that could have led to her developing what I would consider an incredibly sadistic personality. Now, she's living with this guy for a couple of years, and then she moves on and she ends up working in a charity shop. And it's here in the random meeting that she connects with a guy called John Peterson. He'd formerly been a Royal Navy radar operator. Now, she was 18 when she met him and he was 46. I know, it's wrong to judge people because people do have successful relationships with people who are considerably older than them. That definitely happens. I just find it a little bit alarming when we're looking at nearly 30 years and the person that they're with is 18 because you're still really a child. I get it when like a 40-year-old marries a 70-year-old because you're adults and the boundaries between you are far less, although it must be difficult connecting over childhood films and programs that you used to watch. That would be a concern. But you know what I'm saying? Those kind of issues are not as obvious when you're older. But when you're 18, there's a massive gap, And she actually had 3 children with him. So, you know, she gets into quite a committed relationship. Also worth noting, Peterson wasn't just an ex-Royal Navy radar operator, which we will give him as a position of responsibility and respect. Sadly, he was also a convicted paedophile. You had 3 children with a suspected paedophile who arguably was going out with an 18-year-old when he was 46-year-old, so reverting to a potential type there. But anyway, obviously she goes ahead and let's imagine that she's vulnerable at this point in time and she wants some kind of consistency and foundation in her world. Maybe she had got some daddy issues and he's older and she can kind of feel protected by him, but he's a convicted paedophile. She then moves north after she's warned by social services to leave Peterson or to lose her kids. So fortunately, at this point, she goes, oh my God, I'm with a convicted paedophile. I'm absolutely leaving and running as far away as possible like any good mother would. No, she didn't do that. She was like, oh, they've alerted me to the fact that the guy I'm hanging out with is a child molester around my 3 children that I've had with him. But what I'll do instead is I'll just go to the north with him so that we can go and be with a child molester in a place where they don't know he's a child molester. Again, one could say, well, very vulnerable. She's got attachment issues and she's in love with this person and she believes that he's innocent and so on and so forth. Or we could say, she just doesn't care. She really doesn't care. As far as she's concerned, the fact that he was a paedophile was forgivable. So anyway, later down the line, by the way, when Peterson testifies about the relationship that he had with her, he says that she was consistently abusive towards him, massive amounts of domestic violence. He, throughout the entire relationship, felt that nothing that he did was good enough. She was completely off the wall violence-wise, and he didn't feel safe in the relationship at all, which is ironic when you think about his previous behaviours. But nonetheless, this is an individual who suffered at the hands of his partner. He also claimed that he was so worried about the levels of violence that she had that he tried to warn the authorities about her behaviour years and years before. In fact, he even contacted social services because he was really afraid that in the end, she was going to be very violent to the kids. And they apparently ignored all of his concerns. Now, as far as social services ignoring his concerns, I think that likely occurs when people have a bias to an individual. And if they have a history where they know that this guy is a paedophile, and then they find out that their relationship broke down, then the chances are that they would come down on the side of the mother purely because they think he was being vindictive. That could easily be the reason. It's still unforgivable. No one should ignore the idea that a child could be at risk in somebody's home, even if they have a previous conviction of being a molester. Because just because he's a paedophile doesn't mean that he couldn't be a decent father to his children. That might seem strange, but it is very possible. Not all paedophiles are incestuous with their own children. So he may well have had their best interests at heart in that moment when he tried to get some help for them. They do then break up. So he last sees Nicholls in 2003 because she comes into his home with a new partner, 44-year-old Stephen Martin, to just steal some valuables. Just going to bob in, see how you are, take all your stuff. She sounds like a dream, doesn't she? And it's particularly nice that she decided to bring her new date to the situation so that they could have a good old look around at her historical experience with her ex and just remove anything of value. As a side note, because you know, I'm a bit obsessed with research, did have a look at Peterson. For my own benefit, how was he faring as a father and a good citizen, diligently living above the law these days? And apparently not, because most recently he was convicted again. This time for the historical sexual abuse of a 5-year-old child. He raped her on Christmas Eve. So in September, he was jailed for 10 years and 10 months after pleading guilty to one offence of rape of a child under 13. So we can assume potentially, even though it was historically, that maybe he didn't change his ways. But again, what I'd like to say there is it's really good that he did manage to be brought to justice for a crime, historical or otherwise, because the rape of a child of 5 years of age is just mind-bogglingly evil per se. So Nicholls then moves to the northeast, so she wants to be near her mother Janet. And she lived in houses at this point in Newcastle, Gateshead, Hebburn and Jarrow. She ends up living in a house on St Paul's Road, Jarrow, which is in South Tyneside, not far away from where my husband was born. And it's at this point that she meets Stephen Martin and begins the relationship. This guy, by the way, Stephen Martin, it's her mother's ex-boyfriend. And I don't mean just like somebody that she had a brief dalliance with, a few weeks spent in a passionate experience. No, they were together for 7 years. 7 years. Keeping it in the family, if nothing else. You know? Bit weird. And this relationship that Martin and Nicholls have, it's a constant on-off relationship. So she's with him for a period of time and then they separate and so on and so forth. But it's not one that entirely ends, and just keep that in mind for future reference during this video. Now, soon after the breakdown of her relationship with Martin, she ends up beginning a relationship with 35-year-old Andrew Gardner. He's from Bensham in Gateshead. Stay with me on this. He turns out being an ex of Nicholls' younger sister, Krista. It rhymes as well, doesn't it? Sorry, just goes through my head that. Younger sister, Krista. So basically, this is a really odd scenario because it seems that Nicholls is dating her mother's ex and now she's dating her younger sister's ex. So she likes her family's exes. We can see at this point, she is clearly not one for boundaries. Now, Andrew is known by the people who know him well and by even people who just observe him on a day-to-day level, say that he's a really friendly, shy, quiet guy. He was also considered vulnerable. He did have some learning difficulties and he'd been a former pupil of Joycey Road Special School in Gateshead, so he did have needs when it came down to his learning capacity and ability. Now, they meet when he's literally signing on at a special needs course in Tyneside. So whether Nicholls is looking specifically for people with vulnerabilities, I don't know, but it does feel like she has a type, which we'll expand on a little bit later on. But for me, the fact that she saw that this guy was going on a special needs course just lets you know immediately that the idea of vulnerability is probably something that she finds quite positive. And then if we imagine what you want when you control someone, well, the more vulnerable they are, the easier it is for you. The fact that he had learning needs probably shows that he would have been more naive, he would have had less comparisons to make about relationships, and he probably wouldn't understand the intricacies of a deep relationship or a romantic relationship to the context that you would or I would, simply because he had these issues. It's not that he couldn't love, he absolutely was completely capable of love, completely capable of romantic interest, but didn't have the capacity, like others, to really understand the rights and wrongs regarding how you should be treated in these relationships. To some degree, it certainly seems to play out that way when I've explored this individual. Now, Andrew had a really happy upbringing in Dunstan, and he had lovely parents, Jean and Ken. They were a very working class family, salt of the earth, but very, very close and connected. Now, he was the eldest of 3 boys, incredibly close to his brothers, and he spent a lot of time doing things like fishing with his dad. So this was a really solid family. His mother described him as a really kind, caring, loving boy who was never in trouble, was never violent to anyone, so there was no history at all of any aggression. He actually was known, if there was conflict, to just walk away from it. So in July 2008, after living in various properties, Andrew and Nicholls end up moving into a rented terrace house together. It's 14 Arthur Street, that's Chiltern, County Durham. It's Nicholls' 8th home in 8 years. Think about that for a moment, because that tells you something about an individual. Now, there are lots of reasons why people move around a great deal. If you're a terrible tenant, you get kicked out all the time. That means you move around. Or if you're an individual who just isn't very agreeable and your neighbours don't like you and make it difficult for you, then you'll move around. But I suppose the other one is keeping up appearances can only last for a certain amount of time. So let's say you are a very abusive, aggressive, hostile individual, and to everyone else outside you seem like a pretty nice person. The mask will slip at some point. And I imagine that for this person, as far as Nicholls' reality is, she will do that regularly. She will get to a point where it's almost impossible to contain the violence, the anger, the level of hostility that she feels inside, and the brutality that's willing to be doled out on people around her, that's difficult to maintain for a long period of time. So as soon as she feels it bubbling over, she moves on. That would be my belief as to her psychology. So when she moves with her now boyfriend, also her 24-year-old brother, Simon Nicholls, moves in with them. So that's a power balance issue there. When your brother is moving in with you and your boyfriend, that's 2 people from the same family. That can often lead to the person that you're in a relationship with feeling a little bit excluded. So there's already a few concerns about the fact that, one, she's with a very vulnerable man. Andrew is incredibly vulnerable. And 2, she's now got her brother living with them, which means that there are far more on her side than there are on his. And also worth mentioning that her brother absolutely idolized his older sister, and she was known to completely control him because he had this feeling towards her that she knew everything, that she was a particular kind of individual that he needed to respect, and everything that she did, he accepted. Again, that's a massive problem, because let's say you're being violent to your partner and you have a supporter in your family who you can do no wrong as far as they're concerned towards, then the chances are that that person is going to really side with the abuser in this situation. Also, she lived on the same street as a mum. So a 52-year-old mum and a 27-year-old sister literally set up house on the same street. So now we have basically the whole family around this small area, and Andrew is kind of the odd one out, isn't he? That said, Andrew was a really good dad, and he became an absolute surrogate father to Nicole 3 children from that previous relationship with Peterson. They also had a child together. So Nicole and him had a baby. Also, I am going to acknowledge that from the reports I've read and from the testimonies of neighbours, it seems that Nicole's was a Jekyll and Hyde character. She was absolutely capable of convincing people that she was a really nice person. Neighbours actually believed that she was very friendly, that she was an incredibly doting mother, basically a perfect parent. That's the quote. And also she was known to keep her house spotlessly clean. Now, I understand that when people go into a clean house, they make a lot of assumptions about it. I will tell you now, if I go into a house, and this is something that when I was working in safeguarding over the years, if I went into a home and there were loads of kids and everywhere was spotless, it really worried me. I get you should have like a few rooms that look great because, you know, maybe it's the lounge that's kept tidy, or maybe your kitchen's kept clean. But if you've got young kids, I want to see mess. I don't want to see filth. I want to see toys on the floor. I want to hear noise. I want to see that this is a home that is safe for children. So whilst a lot of people will go, well, it's amazing, look how tidy her home is, she must be this really organised, incredible mother because those children are just perfect, that worries me. Equally, it worries me if I walk into a home and I literally have things fall on my head because there is so much mess around. And believe me, I have been in homes like that with used nappies everywhere and dog excrement on the floor. That is also a terrible home. But I think we all know that where children are concerned, there should be a level of toys present and noise present, and just a sense that this is lived in and those children are not afraid. Because if it's too strict, or kids are afraid of playing with things, developmentally, that's not good for them. The truth with her is that she just has this incredibly dominant, incredibly aggressive personality, and her home reflects that. She's in charge. If you stepped out of line, she had an incredibly volatile temper, and she was known to just react violently to even the slightest provocation. So a look in the wrong direction, a word said that she wasn't happy with, there was a very strong reaction. And there was also a level within her of being a predator. She had this incredibly controlling nature. But it feels like when she got into the relationship with Andrew, she didn't just see him as a partner. She saw him as an individual that she could undoubtedly control, but she could almost decimate piece by piece. And that part of her predatory behaviour becomes more and more apparent the longer they're in the relationship. And in fact, people who witnessed the abuse that she bestowed on Andrew said that it began really with her just ridiculing him constantly. She'd call him useless, worthless. She said he was a waste and drain on the household budget. She made him feel like he was emasculated. She made him feel basically like he was somebody who was disposable. And I think that's important as well, because I believe that she absolutely saw him as completely disposable. She had no respect for him whatsoever. And the very fact that she'd chosen somebody who did have learning development issues, it demonstrates that she knew that at the very beginning. He hadn't suddenly transformed into an individual like this. He was always this way. There was not going to be an expectation of any more because of the fact that he had these needs. So the fact that she can then start to instrumentally decimate him piece by piece demonstrates that level of malice and malevolence within her with respect. This is so typical as well of abusive behaviour, because your job is to chip away bit by bit their self-esteem until they genuinely do not recognise themselves anymore. But it's almost been done so slowly initially, and then ramped up to such a point where you're confused, you can't understand how it's changed so much, and you don't know whether you've caused it, because they're so good at making you question every aspect of who you are. You end up reasoning with unreasonable behaviour, and then trying to change your behaviour to accommodate the person that you thought you were in a relationship with who was meant to love you, because it's so different to how it was at the beginning. And that is so challenging. Add to that the fact that this guy has got some special educational needs. He's in the firing line. He really is, where this kind of abusive behaviour is. She starts to control literally every single aspect of his life. So first of all, she starts isolating him from his support network. Remember, he's got a really good family. They're strong, they love him. He's welcome in their home every single day of the week. So it's a crucial issue for an abuser to break that down, because that's a way out for that person. She takes his mobile phone off him, so he can't call his family. She stops him being allowed to take their child to see his family. She stops letting him go out. So literally, by January 2009, he's only allowed to drop the children off at school down the street. That's it. So she's completely cut him off from any social network, from any support network. And she is controlling how many steps he can take every single day. Imagine how scared he must have been. Imagine how controlled he was to allow her to do that at this point. Now, when I use the word allow, I'm not saying that he was a willing participant in it. I'm saying that she had deconstructed who he was to a point where he just did as she said. I mean, that is some high-level toxic abuse. What makes this even more horrific is that she starts controlling what he eats. And she starts starving him. So she makes sure that he doesn't have enough food, so that he starts to lose quite a lot of weight. That is high-level power play, isn't it? Apart from it just being massively abusive, you're taking away the fundamental rights of that human being when you deny them food. So he obviously gets hungry at times. He tries to get food, so when he does, he gets punished. So she literally hits him. He ended up having to try to steal food from the cupboards in his own home. But if he was caught, the punishment was absolutely severe. And she got so controlling of this. This was such a game for her that she ended up counting and weighing the food. And if any was missing, she would absolutely know that Andrew was responsible. And the reason that that's an important point to know is to link back to what I said about her house being so perfect and clean, and the fact that I don't think that's safe when there are children around. I think it's very indicative of control. It's because if she knew exactly what was in the packets, those kids weren't touching them either. Simple as that. If she could count and the same amount were there, or she knew if one had gone, the chances are that the children hadn't been allowed to have food unless they'd been given the okay. So the kids were obviously being very controlled at the same point. Again, the problem for Andrew is that as soon as the kids will cotton on that he's going to get a beating if any food's gone, and if they are being restricted from having treats, then chances are that they'll start taking them because they know he'll get the punishment. She even tore his pockets out, by the way, to stop him from hiding his food. She wouldn't let him join them at the table when they ate. I mean, the exclusion there is just heinous. Imagine how embarrassing that is and humiliating it is. Just not even allowed to sit at your own home table to eat with your family. Imagine how excluded and isolated you feel. And also, what is she giving the message to the rest of the family about in this situation and circumstance? It's that he does not belong. He's in their home, but he doesn't belong. And the witnesses who actually testified, i.e. the children, later down the line, they said he used to stare at them and ask for food. And the response to that was they would just shout at him. If Andrew even ever tried to stand up to Nicholls, dared to say this isn't fair, the response to that was she'd get her brother to beat him up, and he willingly went ahead and did it. So Andrew literally had no way out. Now, after 7 months of living together, the abuse gets even worse. And this is because Nicole's ex-partner, Stephen Martin, moves in too. That's right. Stephen Martin, ex of a mother, he ends up moving in to the house with them. Now, you can imagine, can't you, that Martin and her had this on-off relationship, and then Andrew come into the picture. Chances are he's got some resentment towards Andrew, which is not going to look good for him in this horribly hostile situation that Andrew's already experiencing. And it was clear that Stephen Martin had always intended to be around Nicholls because of the fact that he actually had the keys for number 45, which was opposite Nicole's house, but he didn't actually move it in. So when he arrives at Nicole's house, this is where we see a huge escalation in the torture that Andrew experiences. Worth noting as well, Martin also had learning difficulties. He had an IQ of 59. Now that is in the bottom 1% of the population. Bottom 1%. Why is she going for these guys? This constant is this theme of vulnerability, this opportunity to manipulate and control. It's alluring for her. She likes it. Bear that in mind. This is purposeful and she likes it. She doesn't want a bright, articulate individual to challenge her. She wants essentially an individual that she can dehumanize, much like an animal, to abuse for her own purposes and gratification. And it is for her own purpose and gratification. She enjoys it. Now, Nicholls seems to get kicks as well from inflicting pain on Andrew. There is like a sexual satisfaction to it. And because of that, Martin and her start coming up with different ways to hurt him. And this is horrific. So bear in mind, this is for sexual gratification. This is so that Martin and her can really get off on what they're doing. This is their paraphernalia. They beat, scold, whip him with curtain flex. They slash him with a serrated kitchen knife. They stamp on him, kick him in the head. Martin even puts him in a bath and pours boiling water over his feet. Also, they shove his shoulder and hold it against a really hot radiator. They branded him all over with a heated cigarette lighter, and they also hit him with knotted, wet tea towels. Can you imagine that level of abuse? It's literal torture. If you imagine being put into a situation where you were going to be tortured horrifically, they could do that very effectively using those methods. They are like horror movie methods, aren't they? There's an occasion when he cries. Obviously, he's going to cry. He's in agony and he's constantly being abused horribly. And the consequence of this is that they just write crude abuse on his back in nail varnish because he was, quote, acting like a girl, which is ironic when it's the girl inflicting this kind of horrific abuse on him. Because the words acting like a girl, realistically, what is she saying? Because she's a girl, she's being torturous towards somebody, but then she's accusing him of acting like a girl. Now, I know that the term acting like a girl is meant to be an insult, but to any woman who's ever pushed a watermelon through a lemon, you will know that we have resilience and mettle that is beyond the understanding of most men. No disrespect, guys, it really is. So acting like a girl should mean being incredibly strong, resilient, powerful, and almost something like you could create life from, for example. But jokes aside, the point is she's just using this to humiliate him. She also made him sleep on newspapers because she did not want him to bleed on her carpet. I mean, that in itself, the calculation level there, Like, she wants him there so she can violently abuse him, but she doesn't want any mess on a carpet. And presumably, if he made mess on the carpet, there'd be even more problems. He'd be more abused. It's clear that that's the way that she works. But the fact that she is that premeditated, that she creates a scenario where essentially he's lay on these newspapers so that it absorbs the blood. He's not allowed to sit on settees. He has to sit on the floor. It's horrific. And if that isn't bad enough, what I'm going to tell you now takes the proverbial biscuit when it comes down to the level of malice a human being can hold within their heart and actions. She got her kids involved. So the 5, 7 and 9-year-old, she got them involved. Can you imagine the psychological distress that you are causing those children by bringing them into a scenario where you are actively encouraging them to torture their apparent stepdad? They were so coerced into this behaviour, so convinced that this was completely normal, that they thought that this kind of punishment was normal for stealing food. They even were encouraged by Nicholls to attack Andrew, and they did. Absolutely went for him regularly. And she would then validate and reinforce that behaviour. She would congratulate them for that violence. She was proud of them. I suppose she was thinking chip off the old block. But imagine the level of control that you have in your household when you can take these babes, these little kids, these developing humans, and treat them in a way where they totally believe that violence and torture for stealing food is not just normal, it's something to be celebrated. But she manages to achieve that. And they recall, when they're giving testimony later on, that they punched him, they kicked him, they scratched him with keys, they wrote swear words in pen all over his body. They even used a sharp object to carve a game of noughts and crosses into his chest. Now, apart from the fact that that's utterly horrifying and terrifying and despicable and completely the opposite of what children should be inspired to do, what does it say about Andrew as well? The passivity of him. Think about lying there and letting kids carve noughts and crosses into your chest. Most of us, particularly when we're adults and we have the power to remove them from said body, would certainly have made our feelings known. But to be able to get away with doing that, he's completely helpless, isn't he? He's lost his sense of self to a point where he is just a victim. There is nothing that he feels he can do to change the situation. It's a bit like Pavlov's dogs. It's learnt helplessness, isn't it? It's just a full acceptance that nothing he's going to do is going to change this situation. He just has to lie there and put up with it. Now, one of Nicholls' children, when interviewed, actually stated that she would punch and karate kick Andrew, and also she would encourage the child to hit Andrew too. Now, I know listening to this, you're probably thinking, why didn't he try to escape? Because I think that's the obvious question that most people are going to ask. Why didn't Andrew just get up and walk out of the door? And I know that on one level, we're never going to actually know why he stayed. But there are reasons why people in abusive scenarios do remain. For example, he had a 1-year-old daughter that he doted on. He was an absolutely devoted father. He probably believed he'd never see her again. She was probably saying to him, if you leave, you'll never see your daughter again. And remember, she's left guys before and they don't have contact with her and they don't have contact with the kid. So the truth is that those 3 children have a father that doesn't see them. Okay, he's a paedophile and we don't want him to see her, but she would have done that to anybody else. So he's got evidence that makes him feel insecure about that relationship, and he loves his child. But the other thing is, did he have money? No. Did he have access to transport? No. Did he feel that if he left, there wouldn't be serious repercussions to him or potentially to his child? Most likely. The thing about control is, you don't even have to be violent to make somebody stay. Coercive control is something where you literally can just command every aspect of an individual's life and make them feel so worthless and without choices that they remain in spite of the horrible emotional psychological abuse. Additionalized with physical abuse and torture, you lose sight of who you are. You start questioning, maybe you deserve it. There are all these things that go on for victims that mean that they just remain in torturous and deadly situations with respect. So we all want him to get up and walk out. But to get up and walk out, you need to have the confidence to believe that the consequences of doing so won't be even worse than the consequences you're experiencing whilst you are there. I think that Nicholls as well is an unbelievably masterful manipulator. And truthfully, I think Andrew, rightly or wrongly, certainly in our case wrongly, was in love with her. He loved her. He was probably hoping that they'd get back to those days where they were in a relationship where it was lovely, because that happens. That's what abusers do. They reel you in with this belief that they're an amazing human being and they're going to be gorgeous to you and they're going to care for you and they're fabulous and you have great sex, and then boom, suddenly they reveal themselves. But by then you've formed this allegiance with them, you've formed this connection with them, you find them attractive, you're romantically involved, and so on and so forth. And this is how it works. Andrew was so starved, by the way, that when he died, he weighed 57 kilograms. That's under 9 stone. He was 5'9", so that is way underweight for a guy. And it also means he was completely unable to defend himself from the attacks. He was seen in those final days just lying on the floor or leaning against the wall to try to prop himself up. He was completely deprived of every single aspect, every single speck of human dignity. March 2009, this is horrific to describe, but I'm going to tell you exactly what she does. Nicholls begins jumping on Andrew with her knees. It's a technique that she'd used many times before. Think about that. She's not a huge person. If you want to really inflict harm, you're going to need to put some weight behind your movement, right? So if you think about literally jumping down on somebody with your knees, one, the knees are incredibly hard and solid. It's a bone, isn't it, when you hit it with your kneecap and you're going from a height. So that in itself is a very aggressive form of abuse. It's horrific. And she's also stamping on him. So again, giving herself this gravity to do as much harm as possible. At this point, he's even too weak to move. He already had 6 rib fractures. And if you've ever fractured a rib, believe me, with my second child, when I was pregnant, I went into the nesting phase, as you do, like about 3 weeks before I had him. Went and painted the bedroom I was going to put him in, and got a little bit too slap happy with the way I was moving things, and a star bubble blower that are nice for kids, they blow out bubbles, fell off, knocked me out, and I broke my ribs. And I think I only broke 1 or 2, but let me tell you, amen for pethidine. The only thing I can say, amen for pethidine, because bloody hurt. 6 rib fractures. When you're malnourished, when you're constantly being abused, that would be complete agony, soul-destroying agony. Must have been unimaginable. During when she's doing this kneeing on his chest and stamping on his chest, he then suffers another 10 fractured ribs. Breathing would have been all but impossible because of the pain. At this point, Nicholls actually has sex with Martin in front of Andrew. It's on the living room floor whilst he's just lying in agony. There you go. That paraphilia, that desire sadistically to humiliate your partner by having sex with another man in front of you after you have violently abused them. That turned her on. That was something that titillated her. Now, the fact that Martin's involved there also says there's something not right with him either, is there? But developmentally and on a learning level, he's got such a low IQ that the chances are that he would be complicit in whatever she said Anyway, by the way, I'm not for 1 minute saying that people who have learning disabilities or low IQs are individuals who are sadistic or are willing to do horrible things to any other human being. I'm saying in his case, that would certainly be a contributor. I'm not giving him an excuse. He's a vile, reprehensible human being who absolutely deserves everything that's coming to him. But he is at a lower power because of the fact that she is such a mass manipulator. I think she just wants to break his spirit. She broke his body, and now it's how do I just completely destroy the very essence of what makes him him. The 13th of March 2009, the abuse reaches a peak. And that is almost impossible to say, isn't it? When I've just described the kind of stuff that they're doing, that we can even get to a point where there is a peak, where that wasn't enough. And the final assault plays out. They push him and punch him to the floor. She repeatedly smashes his head into the concrete floor of the living room. Just imagine how dangerous that is. Just think about the level of abuse that's happening at that point. You know, if you blow somebody's head against a concrete floor, the chances are that you have a strong possibility of killing them per se. That's why you see these one-punch deaths, where a kid gets into a fight with another kid, punches them in the face, they go down, hit the head on the concrete, and they're dead. And that kid's up for murder or manslaughter. So she knows what she's doing. And then she stamps on him. And then Simon Nicholls, her brother, and Martin basically pin him down and punch him repeatedly. Andrew had done nothing. He'd just stayed. That's it. He'd complied with pretty much everything from being starved to standing or lying on the floor and not sitting on the couches. He'd not done anything that provoked that in any way, shape or form. And even that wasn't enough. Nicholls needed more. It wasn't enough to humiliate him, to harm him, to abuse him, to torture him. She needed more. She was wanting to feel more and more power. And for us, we can't connect with that. We can't understand that. But if you happen to be a narcissistic, psychopathic killer, then being able to choose to snuff out somebody's life, it is the most alluring experience for them. Like I said, it's a juxtaposition to what we would understand because we care, we have empathy and compassion. We'll all be feeling right now that Andrew didn't deserve that under any circumstances, and we'll all be feeling very angry about the way that Nicholls treated him. That's the normal reaction. But Nicholls is the counter to that. She loves and is thrilled by the agony that she inflicts, and she wanted to know what that was like without a doubt to kill him. The injuries that Andrew sustained are utterly horrific. He already had the broken ribs, but those ribs, because they were broken as well, they end up piercing his vital organs. So his lung caused him to slowly suffocate, literally. It caused essentially a slow puncture, I suppose we could say. And he died a very slow, but nonetheless agonizing death. Now Nicholls obviously has a problem because she has a dead body on her floor, on her incredibly clean floor. So emergency services do receive a call from Simon Nicholls at 11:27 p.m. and he asks for an ambulance to come to the house. He basically says straight away, look, my mate's been in a really bad fight, but at this point he said, I think he's still alive. Now, it's, I suppose, a relatively sophisticated ruse. You've got a badly beaten up individual on the lounge floor and you need to make it look like you weren't involved, so you allay blame to this group of invented people who've apparently beaten him up in a fight. Although arguably, how did he get home if he's in such a state? But okay, let's go with this. It won't be the first time the police and emergency services have been called about similar situations, and they will have attended places where this has been the case. So when the paramedics arrive, Nicholls and her brother and Martin basically try to hide the abuse. So they claim that Andrew had arrived home in a bad state, he'd been mugged, and Simon Nicholls even says, look, he's only been on the floor for about half an hour. The paramedics are like, he's got rigor mortis, literally. His body was stiff, he'd been dead for hours. And when they found him, he was lying on the carpet wearing just shorts. So again, wait a minute, he's been beaten up really badly and he's just come in wearing shorts? Or if he was so severely injured, how did he come in and then take his clothes off and so on and so forth? So that starts ringing bells straight away. The paramedics are immediately suspicious. They just call the police, want to make sure that they're doing everything by due process accordingly. The officers said that they were literally sickened by what they saw. They even said that in their entire careers, they had never seen such injuries. And that's important to note, isn't it? These are coppers. And they see things every single day that you or I would have our toes curl at. And yet this was the worst scene that they come to. When they did a search of the house, they also found Nicholls' mother, Janet Hall, hiding behind a bathroom door. What does that say? I mean, Janet, that probably wasn't a good move. Janet, I mean, there's somebody who's apparently been horribly beaten up downstairs in the lounge, and why would you be hiding in the toilet? I mean, that suggests guilt, Janet. It suggests guilt, Janet, doesn't it? Not a good move. You'd have thought she might have left or something, wouldn't you? Not the most sophisticated family when it comes down to this, are we? Now, the investigating officer actually later stated the injuries that Andrew Gardner suffered could well have been inflicted by medieval torturers. That's how serious it was. And like I said earlier on, it's exactly how it plays out. Because when you imagine those injuries, if you had a torturer for hire, they would have done a job like that, wouldn't they? And police initially do actually believe that Andrew might have been assaulted at a local pub. It probably seems like the most obvious scenario in that moment in time. But as soon as the extent of the injuries get identified, the police instantly begin a murder investigation and they start thinking about potential suspects. And we always know the potential suspects tend to be people who are quite close to those individuals. Now, one of the things that threw the police initially was Nicholls' house was literally spotless. It was very, very neat. That's not what they expect to see. Don't get me wrong, they do often go to places where an individual's been murdered and there'll be one room that's really tidy and then everywhere else will just be a shit heap. And that tends to be because the person's been murdered in that room, they've tried to forensically clean it up and it's at a disjunction to the rest of the house. So it doesn't help them seem not guilty, it kind of indicates guilt. Whereas this is different. Her whole home, remember, is absolutely spotless. It's what she's known for. So you thinking to yourself, well, there doesn't look like there's been a struggle here, there's no blood spatter that's obvious, there doesn't seem to be big smears of blood all over the walls, and every single room seems to mirror this. But obviously, forensics come in and it just lights up because they use things like Lumisol and they're able to see that there are blood splatters up the wall, it's on the radiator, on the settee, there's also blood smears in the bathroom. None of the blood traces were actually visible to the naked eye, but because they tried to clean it up, they genuinely could see remnants of them, and there were enough, there were significant amounts to show that there had been lots of issues where blood had been present. So this in itself demonstrates that this is a crime scene they're dealing with. Andrew's body was such a mass of wounds, it took 6 medical experts days to complete an examination. 6 medical experts. And when the autopsy came back, it was horrifying. The injuries and torture that boy endured. More than 150 separate injuries on his body. 21 rib fractures. I mean, it's just like they were in pieces. Simple as that. He had cigarette and lighter burns to his neck and to his back. Whip-like marks, loads of severe bruising and abrasions all over his body. He had welt marks where he was hit with the wet knotted tea towels. He'd had a bleed on his brain, he had a fractured skull, and one of his arms was cut so deep that he'd actually had a tendon exposed. And basically, the main part of the findings was that his death was not instant, it was just a slow, protracted, and excruciating death. Genuinely torturous. Also, he was actually suffering from blood poisoning and malnutrition when he died. And in fact, the worst injuries, and they were horrific enough, all the ones I've just talked about, but the worst injuries were the burns to his legs and feet, and that was from having the kettle of boiling water being poured over them. And the problem with being malnourished and underweight and not getting the correct sustenance is you can't heal. So if you don't have those attributes in your life and you get something like open wounds and sores from those kind of burns, it's just going to get infected. You need to be given a healthy environment so that you can heal. And he was denied that. Over the last few days of his life, Andrew's injuries were so bad that even if he'd wanted to leave the house, he couldn't. Now, police believe that one of the reasons why his abusers attacked him in the end so badly was that they actually wanted him to leave. But what they didn't understand was that he couldn't. He was emaciated and he was broken and he was terrified. So he just never had the potential to remove himself. Because let's be honest, he would have, if he could have, if he knew that they just wanted him out, then call me a cab, get my parents. But by that point, psychologically, he was too distressed, and physically, he was absolutely ruined. Andrew's parents, Jean and Ken, they basically are at home one day and they see this news report about a killing in Chiltern. So they witness this report. They had absolutely no idea that was their son. Because as soon as he had started getting into a relationship with Nicholls, he basically stopped seeing them. In fact, the last time he'd spoken to his parents, he told them that he'd moved to Jarrow with her, and then he broke off all contact with his family pretty much shortly after. So his parents had no idea that he could be in Chiltern, and they only realised when there was a knock at the door and the police came to tell them that their son had been murdered. They hadn't seen Andrew since 2006. He turned up at their door. He looked really poorly. He looked very thin. He asked them for some money. And they said he looked really scared, really frightened. He was even crying. They said his feet were sore. And when they took off his shoes, he was literally covered in blisters. They gave him half the food at that point. And his mum said, just stay. We'll go and get your clothes from Nicholls' house. But he just said that he had to go back. It was the last time they ever saw him. But he'd later left a message with his gran, and the message was, tell my mum and dad I won't be able to see them no more. And apparently his gran could hear a woman shouting at him in the background. Now we all know that's Nicholls. And we all know, again, that's that manipulative Machiavellian mindset, isn't it? So she's making him make that call to abandon his much loved family. Imagine being somebody who believed that you had the right to do that, let alone the willingness to see that kind of behaviour through. And imagine how desperate that was for Andrew, somebody who adored his family and somebody who was adored by his family. He had everything she didn't. He came from a home of love. He came from relationships of care and compassion. When he turned up at his mum's that day, she wanted him home. No one wanted Nicholls home. And I'm not saying that because any child deserves to have the kind of experience that Nicholls potentially did. I'm saying no one wanted her. And maybe she couldn't bear that. Maybe she couldn't stand the fact that Andrew had everything that she would have liked. And maybe knowing that he did, she sought to destroy it. And she succeeded in destroying it. Now, during the initial questioning, Nicholls and the accomplices involved in the crime tell police that on the day that he died, Andrew basically leaves the house about 8 p.m. He's assaulted when he's out. It occurred somewhere away from the house and other people were responsible. Then he came home around 11 p.m. I mean, you can just kind of marvel, can't you, at the way that they believe this story is going to be. Oh, yeah. Basically, Andrew just went, did something, came home very injured, died. That's it. We have nothing to do with it at all. Blood spatter in the house that you're going to find. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It's all to do with him. Came in, made a mess, cleaned it up. We're just a very proud place in our home. You know what I mean? They're not really thinking about this with clarity, are they? But this is the story that they stick to. They then say that Andrew had taken his top off, sat on the carpet, made a sound, collapsed backwards and died. I mean, again, they've obviously worked on this together, and the other thing that's clear is they all gave the same suggestion of the story. Now, on one level, you're like, well, yeah, of course, because if you see something happen, you're going to remember it that way. No, we all remember things differently. So if there's 3 people in a room and that actually happens and somebody walks in and collapses, you'll all have different ideas of how it happened, what sounds he made, what time it was. In fact, the more linear a story is shared by people who've seen something, the more likely it is to be an absolute crock of shit. So they will also, as officers, be realising that this sounds too obviously constructed to be real. They also then say to the people they're questioning, listen, the alleged assault you're talking about, in no way does that justify the injuries that we found. So that in itself provokes more of a concern that they are telling this story that clearly can't be true, because there is no way that Andrew would have been able to walk in, take his top off, and then just suddenly die. It just wouldn't happen like that. And the injuries were long-term injuries. They weren't just instant. These were things that were injuries on top of injuries. So they had been happening for a period of time. Now, the investigation also revealed that the neighbours didn't even know that Andrew was living in the house. He hadn't been seen. So for about 3 weeks, he hadn't been seen in public at all. So he hadn't been picking up Nicole's 3 children from school, which was something that people had been used to. And that's because he'd basically been a prisoner in his own home. And the reason for that is his abusers didn't want anybody to see the injuries. So the fact that they were becoming more and more gratuitously violent towards him meant that he was looking more and more injured. So to avert any potential people getting involved, they just stopped him going out full stop. So no one had any idea about the abuse at all. And one neighbour actually said that when she thought about it on reflection, she actually used to hear Nicholls screaming and shouting, but she didn't pin it to this idea that there was something really terrible happening. Because when she saw Nicholls in public, she was always acting really lovely and really caring. The kids appeared nice and well cared for. And whilst occasionally she did see Andrew, he didn't really engage. So he seemed nice, but he seemed very shy. So she didn't feel that there were alarm bells ringing. Although I've got to say, if I hear screaming and shouting in houses, I do tend to take note. And okay, if it's a one-off, fine. But if you're walking past your neighbours and you're hearing screaming and shouting constantly, I would argue that there is a need to react to that, because if there are children involved, then they're at risk. And if there's abuse happening, then you won't know unless you do something about it. I'm better to be safe than sorry in my mindset, because it really is amazing the difference that neighbours can make when they do intervene. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that all of us start ringing up social services about our neighbours if we hear the odd argument, because that would happen to all of us. I'm saying that when you consistently hear things, it's something that we should take action over. It's how people can be saved from horrible scenarios. Now, lots of neighbours after the event, there's an exodus from the street. They cannot deal with the fact that this horrific, torturous death has happened on their doorstep. So the psychological trauma that just knowing this occurred in their locality is enough to mean that they don't want to be there anymore. See how normal that kind of human reaction is compared to what we're talking about when we think about Nicholls' behaviour. You know, this very human, compassionate, compelled reaction when you realise that this man has been murdered brutally in your neighbourhood. It creates such aversion, such a resistance, a rejection of, that they literally pack and leave. Remember, Nicholls' family, they only live a few doors away. They claim they have no idea of the abuse. No idea of the abuse at all. That's why her mum was hiding in the bathroom. Look, I know, I can't say for sure that the family knew, but I don't get how you wouldn't. I think what we're talking about is we're just going to look away. We're going to look away when we see this injured man who's sat on the floor and isn't allowed to eat at the table and looks very, very thin. We're just going to look away at that. So I think the reality is there was complicity in here, there was collusion in this, but nonetheless, they're saying that they didn't realise that apparently Nicholls' facade turned Andrew basically into an invisible man that no one noticed. So, of course, the police know straight away they've got these people banged to rights. It's as simple as that. So Nicholls, her brother and Martin get arrested and they get charged with Andrew's murder. And rightly so. And rightly so. All plead guilty. No, they don't. They all plead not guilty. Why would they go with guilty when they can go with not guilty? No, I didn't murder him. No, I didn't brutalise him. No, I didn't torture him. There's blood splatter all over your house. Yes, it's nothing to do with us. It was when he came in, he cleaned it up. You didn't say that in your testimony. I didn't do it. He was very, very thin. We're being told that you didn't feed him. He was just somebody with a poor appetite. You know, you can just imagine, can't you, the fun that the prosecution would have with not guilty ideas. I mean, where do we begin? I have no qualifications in law. I have a healthy interest in it, but none in law, and I'm pretty sure that even against a defence who was excellent, I'd still win on this one. So it gets to court, January 2010, and it begins at Teesside Crown Court. You've got Judge Peter Fox presiding. I don't know how I'd feel about having a Judge Peter Fox presiding. I mean, it sounds like a cool name, but also you think about sly, slippery, don't you? No, slippery isn't one that you think about foxes, Emma. Slippery would be more of a snake, wouldn't it? Furry would be a furry, sly creature. I love foxes, however. I was a hunt sab for a long time. I protected foxes. I'm just saying, Judge Peter Fox, you don't feel like you're going to get a lot away with that, do you? You just feel like he's going to be somebody who's going to be onto you. Anyway, Nicholls basically, at this point, attempts to plead guilty, which is great, isn't it? Because she is. But instead of saying, I'm guilty of murder, she says, I am guilty, but only of manslaughter. Nicholls, I wonder whether your team suggested you do that, or whether you were just like, I've got an idea, guys. I think I should just plead guilty to manslaughter. And I'm sure that your defence would be like, yeah, you brutally tortured and murdered a guy in your home, and we have a lot of evidence and witnesses, such as your kids, saying that. I'm just thinking that manslaughter might not be the one. I know, but I'm thinking manslaughter might be the one. Anyway, I don't know how it played out. I'd like to imagine it's like that, because I would like to believe that the defence at no point believed that they'd be able to get away with the plea of manslaughter. But who knows? Anyway, it gets rejected by the prosecution straight away, because they're like, yeah, I mean, we could, but then why don't we just go for murder, which is what it clearly is. And they get expert witnesses who give graphic accounts of the injuries that Andrew suffered. They get pathologist Dr. Nigel Cooper, who states it would have taken some time to die following the final assault. So the fact that somebody could have called an ambulance, the fact that they let him die, there was an intention there, wasn't there? He also said the only reasonable explanation for those injuries is that someone jumped onto Andrew Gardner repeatedly, either with their feet or knees. And he concluded that Andrew died a day or so after receiving the second set of chest injuries. So he was completely vulnerable. He was absolutely helpless. Also, there were a massive amount of abrasions, bruises, burns, almost all of which were said to have been painful, which would have basically made him completely immobile in performing pretty much any daily task. Now, the prosecution stated that at the time of the final attack on Andrew, after already suffering 21 rib fractures in need of urgent medical attention, that instead of getting help, the individuals who attacked him just carried on horrifically assaulting him. They punched him, stamped on him, smashed him into the concrete floor. And Clare Nicholls even got her 7-year-old son to stamp on his burnt foot. And she got him to stand so hard on that burnt foot that he fractured it. Her 7-year-old kid. What kind of a monster is this woman? I don't use those words very frequently in these. It's not a psychological word. We can all agree with it, but I think it fits. She's a monster. Now, the term mens rea of murder is basically given to crimes that involve an intention to cause death or really serious bodily harm. So the prosecution argued that there was a clear intent to cause the latter. And they said it was apparent that Andrew Gardner had been severely and repeatedly beaten, burnt and tortured over a period of weeks. And prosecutor Paul Sloan QC said some of the wounds, in particular the rib fractures, would only normally be seen in a car crash or fall from a great height, which is harrowing, isn't it? That's how severe, that they thought that they'd only seen these kind of injuries in a severe car crash or a fall from a great height. So imagine falling from a building. That's what they were expecting to see. Those kind of injuries in that kind of situation, not in a scenario that plays out in somebody's home. Because the level of gratuity and harm has to be consistent, powerful, and go on and on and on to cause these kind of car crash injuries. The prosecution claim that the defendants would go out of their way to basically abuse Andrew for any reason whatsoever. If he told lies, if he stole food, if he nodded off. In fact, Nicholls used to torture him by not letting him fall asleep. She would make him walk around constantly so that he couldn't sleep. And then if she was doing something else and was distracted, she would then get her kids to make sure he didn't fall asleep. Just think about the deprivation. This is unbelievable. This is a woman who spent pretty much all her time thinking up new opportunities to inflict harm on this man, the father of her 1-year-old child, and rounding up family members from her brother to her children to ensure that her work was carried out. One of the members of the jury actually wept when they heard that the children were involved. Dr. Cooper referred to a grotesque game of noughts and crosses on Andrew's body, which the kids got involved in. And the children actually thought that Andrew's abuse was totally normal, totally justified. As far as they were concerned, when he disappeared from the home, obviously when he was dead, they had been told that he'd been taken to prison for nearly breaking the family. So even in death, he is being used to justify the actions of those who took his life. And she is using that psychological manipulation to justify his absence to the children and to confirm why he was such a terrible human being. And when you think about it, this was her stepdad that she's now saying is in prison because he was so terrible to the family. Now, the children did have to give evidence. It was done by video link. And Nicholls' 7-year-old son described how they treated Andrew, because kids are honest. That's the thing, isn't it, in this situation and scenario? The Achilles heel of these kids who've been brought up thinking this is completely normal. And if you bring them up thinking this is completely normal, then they don't have a problem telling people about it, right? Because, hey, this is what you do. So this is what he says, and I'm going to quote what he said. "My mum got him and stamped on him. She does that because he's stealing food. He thieved a chocolate bar once. We hit him as well. I scratched him with keys and also hit him with my fists. We wrote swear words on his back. We'd do that in pen and nail varnish." From the mouths of babes, but very powerful. That kid isn't lying. And the very things that she sought to abuse and coerce and to channel into abusers themselves become essentially that Achilles heel. The jeopardy is created by her own children. Her guilt is shown that way. Now, Nicholls denies that she intended to murder Andrew, but she does admit to the police that she lied about how he sustained his injuries, and she also says that she was controlling and that she had a bad temper. I think a bad temper is maybe underplaying it a little bit, Nicholls. I mean, a bad temper is having a bit go of your partner because they burnt your food. Bit of a bad temper was having a bad day. Not taking the plate, smashing it around their head, smashing the head against the kitchen unit, and then throwing the hot food over them. That's the level you were at. That's not a bad temper. That's a disgusting, reprehensible domestic abuser stroke murderer. She also then admits that she was the one who attacked him, caused most of his injuries, but she does accuse her brother and Martin of contributing, and rightfully so, because they did contribute. And she claims that on the day that Andrew actually died, she only punched him twice. They were having a row about his laziness. Again, a row is something two people have. That's not what happened. It would be a monologue of abuse. That was what was going on. She was having a monologue of abuse at the fact that Andrew wasn't doing very much because he was emaciated, desperately injured and dying. Anyway, despite bringing this in as if she wasn't really involved in those final moments, her son tells the court that on the day before Andrew dies, that she battered him until he was bleeding all over. Nicholls then does take responsibility for jumping on Andrew with her knees, but she said it was just one occasion and that she didn't realise how much pain it would cause. Really? I mean, I've poked myself in the eye before now and thought there was a strong chance I might never see again. Mildly poking myself in the eye. I fell over and cut my knee. and thought, I probably need hospital attention and a stretcher. You know, pain is something that tends to give us a feedback. We don't want to do it again. So like, if you get punched in the face, you don't go around and then try to purposefully and willfully get punched in the face again, because you tend to think, oh, really hurt. Don't want to get punched in the face again. Unless you've walked around in bubble wrap your entire life and never fell over, banged into a wall, a lamppost, maybe when you're drunk, that might have happened to me on occasion, you bloody well know pain. Unless you are that tiny, tiny percentage of human beings who actually don't feel pain, but she did. I mean, there are human beings who genuinely don't feel pain. They're a very, very, very tiny minority, but they literally don't feel pain. They don't even feel emotional pain. Can you believe that? They don't even feel emotional pain. They feel no physical pain, no emotional pain. Bizarre, and yet true. Amazing to some degree. Anyway, I digress. She's lying through her teeth. It doesn't take a moment of thought. Even if you haven't ever experienced a really serious injury, if you said to 100 people on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you imagine pain level would be if I were to lie you on the floor and then jump up in the air and then land on you directly in your chest with my knees? I think they'd all be like, 15? I think it's a 15. I think you might kill me. But anyway, this is what she's doing. She's minimising it. She's constantly minimising this idea that somehow she didn't really know she was going to do any harm. And then she goes on to accuse her brother of being the person who caused all the other rib fractures. And she said that basically he would attack Andrew if he stuck up for her in arguments that she had with her brother. So now Andrew is getting attacked because he's basically defending his partner. And that's provoking her brother. And then he's beating Andrew up. I mean, this is just the most ridiculous fabrication, and she's tripping herself up. She's going in circles and she's just getting lost, because the reality is when you lie, you often have to lie more to try to make sense of the lie that you initially told. That's the great thing about being honest. It might be difficult at times. We might feel that it brings us a little bit of conflict, but at least we don't have to remember all the things that we said, because it's just truth and it'll always be truth. Now, the prosecution instantly are like, you've lied from the beginning to the end of this story. You've changed your story constantly to play down your role in Andrew's death. You haven't really acknowledged your own part in the killing. And the reason for that is if you admitted your part in it, you know that you'd be guilty of murder. And when Nicholls is kind of confronted with all this, she's like, well, okay, I lied a bit, but only because I was scared of the police. Really? I mean, as a woman, you certainly don't seem to be scared of men. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't think that the police walked in and were like, who is this timid, retiring woman? I think they were like, who the freak is this maniac? Who is this person who has done catastrophic damage to this human being? You, Nicholls, are the person that the police would fear, because police are about serving to protect as opposed to murdering partners and torturing people. So she says basically she was frightened in the beginning and that's why she couldn't tell the truth. So the prosecution say, listen, you're lying through your teeth, you're trying to blame your brother because at the end of the day, you know he implicated what you did when we interrogated him. So her brother had basically given interviews and given evidence that had suggested that Nicholls was guilty. So Simon Nicholls had said that she had a really bad temper, that she would lose it, and that when she did lose it, she was very capable of seriously harming you. And she actually recalled an incident where she had drop-kicked Andrew. Now in court, Nicholls shouted at her brother, right? So we're in court and Nicholls is there to defend her honour and to act like an innocent person, remember? She did nothing, it was everybody else. So when this is brought out and essentially her brother is telling the truth about what happened, Nicholls shouts at him. And she shouts, that's rich coming from you. You were the one that kicked him in the ribs. Now, I'm no expert in juries or courts, but I think if you're trying to be innocent and look like, you know, a shy, retiring, demure individual who could never be aggressive, then I'm not sure shouting at a witness in the court of law and then kind of saying, yeah, I did do loads of stuff, but you got him in the ribs, is going to be a thing that works for you. Just going to say that. I think Nicholls is probably demonstrating her inability for impulse control at this moment in time. And in fact, by the way, this isn't just a don't say that, I'm innocent kind of moment. No, she had to be restrained by the dock officers and the trial actually had to be stopped. They had to halt this trial, literally, because she was that aggressive and was literally trying to get across to attack her brother. I'm sure at that point the jury were like, she's so not guilty. There is nothing about this woman whatsoever that makes me feel that she is guilty. I imagine that at least 11 of the jury were like, Judge, can we just stop listening now? Can we go out and just then come back? And like, we've heard enough. That would be, I imagine, where the jury are. Now, during cross-examination, Nicholls did repeatedly break down and she claimed, I do know one thing, that I never wanted to see that man die. Now, I don't believe her at all. I don't. I absolutely fully believe that when she killed him, there was an intention to kill him. I'm not saying that she wanted to do it in that moment. I'm saying that she definitely had thought about that. Her actions validate that. Whether she wanted to kill him in that moment, well, that's up for discussion. But the idea that she didn't want to see him die when she inflicted that amount of injuries on him just does not make sense. I think what she means is, I didn't want to get caught for killing him. Now, in his testimony, Martin actually described the final assault on Andrew. And he said, Clare was hitting and punching him, swearing at him. He was trying to lash out with his arms. Then she lost her temper and she started pushing him, banging his head off the concrete floor in the front room. She said, I've killed him. And she repeated that 3 times. I've killed him. I've killed him. I've killed him. The prosecution also read statements of TV engineer Graham Stevenson. Now, he'd installed satellite television at the home 2 weeks before Andrew's death. And he had witnessed a row over smoking, and he stated that Nicholls was shouting at Andrew aggressively, saying, you know it's my house, when the engineers leave, you leave. You've had one beating, you want another. So he'd witnessed this. And he said that Andrew had appeared absolutely terrified and was just saying, I know. I mean, the fact that she did that in front of somebody, again, that's a very powerful message to the person being abused. It's like, look what I can do in front of other people and no one is going to come and help you. No one will believe you. It's a very clear power play. After a 3-week trial, there's a jury of 7 men and 5 women, and ultimately they found all 3 defendants guilty of murder. Of course they did. So in January 2010, Clare Nicholls was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 32 years, and that is a big sentence, She basically didn't react when the sentence was read out, and the judge said, you have a deeply entrenched personality disorder. I think we can all very, very widely agree that she definitely did. Simon Nicholls, well, he got sentenced to life. He got a minimum term of 25 years, and the judge stated his part in the killing was less than his sister's, but knowing full well what your sister was doing to this man, you repeatedly were the enforcer, stepping in cruelly when he sought to resist or avoid her attacks. In February 2010, Martin was sentenced to life. He got a minimum term of 20 years, and the judge stated, it was the perverted pleasure in the suffering of another. There is no more accurate word than sadistic to describe it. You won't be surprised, guys, that they went quietly and accepted their terms, knowing that they were terrible, reprehensible humans who needed to pay society back for their awful actions. Yes, that didn't happen. They instantly were like, appeal. So they did. So they appealed their minimum terms in 2010, and the reason for that is they argued that they were manifestly excessive. You brutally murdered a guy after torturing him for months and literally leaving him to deal with a slow, agonising suffocation. And you think you getting 32 years and you getting 20 years, so on and so forth, you think that that's excessive? Like, in America, you might be on death row and you definitely are never going to walk the streets again. But this is the narcissism, isn't it? Well, we want to get out. We want to get out earlier. So June 2010, the judges look at the Court of Appeal and they rule that the sentence was entirely justified. Entirely justified. So after they serve the minimum terms, they will only be released if the parole board considers that they no longer pose a danger to to the public, which I am not sure Nicholls will ever be able to prove. Now let's think about Nicholls' personality. She was highly abusive. She looked for weakness and she exploited it. Vulnerability, she exploited it. She isolated him. She dehumanized him. She broke him mentally. She broke him physically. She was highly sadistic. Her sexual gratification came from inflicting pain. And she was, without doubt, in all the circumstances we've talked about, she was the instigator and main perpetrator of the violence. Let's be honest. We don't need a psychiatrist to go and do a questionnaire about whether she's potentially psychopathic. I think there's quite clear evidence of psychopathic personality disorder. She was manipulating, she was controlling, she controlled every single aspect of Andrew's life. She may as well have used their daughter as a pawn. She controlled her brother, she controlled her ex, she even controlled the kids and got them involved in the abuse. She was able to create this facade of a loving, caring mum and partner. She was most definitely a pathological liar. She was extremely violent. One could use the word evil, and she definitely had no conscience. So, like I said, we haven't got a forensic psychiatrist or psychologist or clinical psychologist in the room. I don't think we need one. I think we'll just go for obvious points that fit classification of psychopathic personality disorder. It's just my opinion. It's just my opinion. I'm just saying it. You have yours. You might think differently, and I'm okay with that. Now, after the trial, Andrew's mum Jean said, the thoughts of what went on at the hands and direction of that evil woman has left me with nightmares that will probably never go away. It's unspeakable what she and others did. You don't do that to another human being. They've turned our families' lives upside down and left us empty shells. I called them evil to their faces in court, but it hurt even more to see their smug reaction. I mean, that is heartbreaking. The fact that the way that the individuals who were being tried and sentenced actually were smug when she said that, that shows something darkly, darkly disturbing. His father, Ken, said, "The worst thing for me is not having seen him for so long. We've got nothing to remember him by. There's no clothes, no jewellery or anything. Nicholls destroyed everything. We just want some sort of keepsake, but we haven't got anything." After Nicholls' conviction, her ex-partner and father of her 3 older children, John Peterson, described constant domestic abuse that he suffered at her hands. He described her as the most evil person to walk this earth. And remember, he's a child rapist, so I mean, we can take that as a pretty damning evaluation of an individual, can't we? The fact that, in spite of who he is, he sees her as the most evil person to walk this earth. He said, she beat and battered me all the years I was with her, 4 or 5 times a week. She was horrible, a control freak who'd flip all the time. She'd throw her shoes, punch me, have a go and verbally abuse me for the least thing. If I went to the shops without her, she'd attack me. If I did the gardening, she'd do the same. I still have nightmares. Peterson stressed the difficulty facing abused men, which is a very valid point. No matter what his history and conviction, it's a very valid point. It's very difficult for men. And he said, it's very hard when you're beaten up by a woman as a man. You're ashamed. The authorities don't take you seriously. Detective Chief Inspector Mick Nail, who led the murder investigation, stated it was the worst case of violence Durham Constabulary have ever had to investigate, which speaks for itself. He said Clare Nicholls led and orchestrated the abuse and degradation of Andrew and topped his suffering with humiliation, made worse by the fact that she involved her own children. The nature of the evidence the jury had to hear during the trial was so traumatising that the judge gave them a 20-year exemption from jury service. 20-year exemption. Now, I get it. I've never been on jury service. Most people haven't. But to do that demonstrates that he wants to require distance from that possibility. So should they ever be called again, they will have had years to deal with their post-trauma. And also, whilst we've talked about the horrors that have been inflicted on that poor man, think about the kids, the potential future impact on the children's development. You know, they witnessed extreme violence on a daily basis. They thought it was normal. They were encouraged to take part in it. They carved noughts and crosses into Andrew's body. They wrote swear words all over his body. They punched him, they kicked him. One of the boys stamped on his burnt, blistered foot and fractured it. You know, they believed all the way through that Andrew was in the wrong, that he'd been rightly punished for stealing food, for lying. Imagine the trauma, the conflict that they're now dealing with. The world as they know it just crumbled and fell. The whole narrative of their actions, suddenly the opposite of what they believed. And then add to that, they had Nicholls as a role model. Let's just hope that those kids have been given a really good foster placement or family placement with people who can actually nurture and care and heal them. Because if not, the fractures that have been done to those babes, they could have catastrophic impact on both them and society at large. And they are victims in this. They are absolutely victims in this. They were made perpetrators, but they didn't understand what they were doing. They could never have consented to that. And the reality is that the wounds that they will have and the significant impact of the memories that will haunt them are something that will damage them for a whole lifetime. I hope you found this case horrific, obviously, but I hope that you've found it interesting from the perspective of coercive control, violent control, domestic abuse, and just how human beings, no matter their size, no matter their shape, no matter their gender, can find themselves in these toxic situations where their lives are genuinely at risk. And I hope we also remember that if we see things that look too good to be true, then sometimes they can be, such as an entirely spotless house where children are meant to be busy enjoying themselves. And I also think it's really important to note that whilst we definitely have a stigma where people find it difficult to talk about domestic violence per se, it's definitely getting better for women in particular. But I think we have to acknowledge that men still really struggle with just coming out and having these conversations. And I hope that doing videos like this, it will alert you if you are a man in a situation where you know that the behaviour of the woman around you is just not something you should tolerate, but you are doing, that you listen to the warning that Andrew can give you. Because he doesn't have his words anymore. His legacy is what happened to him. And let his legacy serve you to make sure that you don't end up in a situation like this too. Let me know what you thought. Leave me some comments, give me a like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed and you keep coming back, or if you've liked it and you want to subscribe just because you want more of my material. Like I said, on a Wednesday and a Sunday, I release content religiously. Got my Patreon link below if you want to look at it, and hopefully you've found what I've talked about at least a warning, if not something that's inspired you to find out more about things like coercive control and domestic abuse. Oh, and before I go, I've also got merchandise out. I will link that below. It's exciting. Feels a bit narcissistic, I'm not gonna lie, but hopefully it'll be fun. And as you know, Kenny's crime cult forever. Kenny's crime cult forever, until I die. But that's not gonna happen for a while, I don't think. So Kenny's crime cult until I'm not here. And then it can be the legacy of my crime cult. Your kids can have the t-shirts and stuff. See you soon, take care, thanks for watching, see you next time.